Today in Capechi's Corner, we're going to look at solving quadratic equations by finding square roots. We know we have a quadratic equation when my highest power is x squared. In order for that to happen, a cannot equal 0. Now there's our standard form. Ax squared plus bx plus c is equal to 0. Now, if we want to solve a quadratic equation, we've done factoring in the past, which will work sometimes, but not all the time. There's a couple different ways we can do it. Today we're going to solve quadratic equations by finding the square roots. So here are the steps. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to isolate x squared or whatever variable we're using, so getting the variable by itself. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to take the square root of both sides of the equation, which we're going to explore in just a little bit. Now remember, when you do that, the biggest thing that students forget is you have to remember that you have to attach a plus or minus symbol in front of the value. Now again, just a reminder, we looked at it this last lesson, is you can't take a square root of a negative number. The answer will always be no real solution. Our directions say to solve the equation. Now remember, when we see the word solve in math, we're trying to get a variable to be equal to a value. X is equal to a number or y is equal to a number. So let's look at how we can do this. Now we already have our variable isolated. So we have x squared. So now I need to figure out how can I get rid of that square. So let's think about it. If I have the value of the square root of x, that's really the same thing as saying x to the 1/2 power. So if I start with x squared, and if I were raise that to the 1/2 power, remember, a power to a power I multiply, so that would give me x to the first, which is what I want. So if I go back to number 1, in order to get rid of that square, I want to take x to the 1/2 power. How do I do that? I take the square root. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other side. So this gives me x to the first. Now here's where I need to add that plus or minus that we talked about in our steps. The square root of 25 is 5. So our answer is x is equal to plus or minus 5. Now let's see, why do I have to say plus or minus 5? Well, let's go back to our original. I had x squared is equal to 25. So without using any mathematical concepts, let's just think about what works. 5 times 5 is 25. So 5 squared is 25, but negative 5 times negative 5 is also 25, which is why we have to remember to use that plus or minus symbol. Now in number 2, same thing, I have x squared. So I'm going to take the square root of both sides. I get x by itself, which is what I want, x to the first. Now this time the square root of 0 is just 0. 0 is a neutral number. There is not a plus 0 and a minus 0, so I don't need to use that symbol. So our answer is simply x is equal to 0. Now number 3, same thing. The x is isolated, so I'm all set. Take the square root of both sides. So I have x is equal to square root of negative 9. I noticed that there's something wrong there. We talked about the fact that I can't have a negative number as a radicand. So my answer there is no real solution. Now why do we say no real solution? As you get further with radicals, you'll use something called imaginary numbers. But we're not there yet, not in this first basic lesson in Algebra 1. So for now, we're just going to say a square root of a negative number is the answer there is no real solution. Let's continue on with some other examples. So we're still solving the equation. In number 4, now I notice on number 4 that I don't have my variable isolated. I don't have that x by itself. It's multiplied by 4. How do I get rid of that 4? Well, I do the opposite operation. It's 4 times x squared, so this time I'm going to divide both sides by 4. When I do that, I have x squared is equal to 144 divided by 4 is 36. Now that I have my variable isolated, I can finish it. I want to get rid of that square, take the square root of both sides, and I have x is equal to plus or minus 6. In number 5, I have x squared plus 8. So again, I need to do my opposite operation. So I'm going to subtract 8 from either side, and I have x squared is equal to 169. Take the square root of both sides. I have x is equal to plus or minus 13. Now the great thing about these problems is once you get your answer, you can substitute it back in to your original and you could check your work. You can plug in both positive 13 and negative 13, and if you get a true statement, then you know you have the right value. In number 6, I have x squared minus 6, so again, there's my wall. I'm going to add 6 to both sides, and I have x squared is equal to negative 4. Take the square root of both sides, and again, I notice that I have a negative radicand, which I can't have. So my answer here is no real solution. Let's continue solving some equations. And number 7, this is going to be a multiple step process. So there's my wall. I want to get my x squared by itself. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to add 46 to both sides. And I'm left with 3x squared is equal to 48. Divide both sides by 3. And I have x squared is equal to 16. Take the square root of both sides. And x is equal to plus or minus 4. And number 8. There's my x squared right here, so I'm going to bring 130 to the other side. And I have negative x squared is equal to negative 121. Now I don't quite have x squared by itself because of this negative 1. So I'm going to divide both sides by negative 1. And I have x squared is equal to positive 121. Take the square root of both sides. And x is equal to plus or minus 11.